Dishonorable Mention is brought to you by 813area.com. 813area.com is the place to go to see where to go and what to do in all of Hillsborough County. Whether it's the best events, the newest restaurants, or where to be in Tampa Bay, 813 Area is your resource for everything happening around town. For the latest on where to be in 813, check out 813area.com. Dishonorable Mention is now on social media. Follow us on Facebook, and we're at Dishonorable Pod on Twitter too. Next week, we'll start taking questions from Twitter because y'all have been an amazing part of this. Thank you.
Welcome to another episode of Dishonorable Mention. And we're going to start this episode with a very special story from Representative Chris Latvala about dating a crazy girl. Chris, go. Okay, maybe we're not going to start with that. Let's shift gears to a more placid discussion about what's happening in Tallahassee.
Are we going to get introduced first? I feel like for
I'm
first-time
sorry.
listeners, we should probably...
Okay, well, that is the voice of Dr. Carla Mastracchio.
Aloha.
As I just mentioned, we're also here with Representative Chris Latvala and community activist Becca Teeter. I, of course, am Ernest Hooper of the Tampa Bay Times. And for reasons that cannot be explained, I'm feeling a little froggy this morning, and I'm just ready to jump right in.
Is it because of the lightning? Or Magic Johnson?
Either one. I'm not sure what's going on, but as always, I'm happy to be with you guys and eager to get the discussion started. What is the deal with the Little League team? What are you trying to do there, Becca?
Okay, so number one, it partially serves Chris's district because I'm in his district and where we are at. But, you know, nobody really
Speaking of
raises
great representation in Tallahassee.
moderately strong on some issues, but exceptionally charming and a dear friend. But no, so the Little League, you know, we get our team sponsored and whatnot, but there's a huge interest in kids who it costs like $175 just for registration. And then you need like pants and equipment and stuff like that. And there's a long list of kids, predominantly Hispanic and African American, that want to play, that are very much a part of that community. And it's a super white league, and the board would like to do something about it. And they're raising money, but it's hard, you know, because they have to raise money to maintain fields and stuff like that. So I would like to help give any kid that's sitting on the sidelines a chance to tag in who can't afford to do it. And I think that's something that, you know, I mean, we believe in opportunity for kids, and I think that's totally in our wheelhouse.
Yeah, I think that's a terrific idea. I'm hoping that my friends at the Tampa Bay Rays are listening because I think they would be interested in helping with that effort. They actually have some programs designed to get more urban kids involved in youth baseball.
Who told you that yesterday?
I heard that is something of knowledge. That was one of the things that Representative Latvala, who I will say has spent a lot of time asking questions about this and shown great interest in helping the children.
Because some of us weren't able to play much in Little League, and that didn't have anything to do with our means. It was more based on our ability.
Yes, we have determined that we are, well, Carla's the most athletic out of all of us, and that's just because of her ability to walk so well in high heels. It's none of us are winning any athletic. We will not
I'm
be.
pretty clumsy.
Yeah, none of us are athletes.
Carla, did you play sports?
I rode horses a lot. I mean, that's equestrian counts, but that doesn't really count. I mean,
Yeah, I don't know if that
it
counts.
wasn't- I mean,
It's a
Olympic
real sport.
It's
Yeah.
hard, but I mean, I rode horses a lot, and I danced for a long time, but I wasn't good.
Did you run track?
No,
Could you hoop?
no,
Volleyball?
no. I got hit in the face with a
You're
volleyball
built
once.
like a volleyball player.
I know. I got hit in the face with a volleyball, a soccer ball. I almost detached my retina because I got hit in the face with a
Chris
soccer
and
ball
I are built for
once.
team management.
I'm always the third base coach.
Yeah,
or the
I did
assistant
synchronized
manager.
swimming, and I swam competitively when I was like 6, but like that wasn't.
I'd like to see you synchronized swim.
I
Was your
wasn't
hair
good.
all slicked back in jail?
I wasn't good. That's the thing. Like my mom
Reminds me of like Martin Short on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, I wasn't
I
good.
want to see young
It's all
pictures
right.
of everybody. Although Ernest looks the same,
I was
except
cute.
for his mustache gets more severe over
Yeah,
time.
I know. I wish I looked the same.
I wish I looked that way. I was cute then.
I was a really cute kid.
Yeah.
So speaking of sports, and we're taking a very different approach with this episode, but since we're on sports, let's talk about what may be one of the greatest collapses in the history of sports.
I'm
And
so sad.
I don't think I'm overstating that.
No, I'm
The
like
Tampa Bay Lightning won an NHL record-tying 62 games this season, and now they find themselves down 2 games in the first-round playoff series, and they look horrific.
I'm petrified
It's-
they're going to lose.
It's like the team that won 62 games has been sucked through a black hole, and they've been replaced by a bunch of losers. I can't explain it. What do you think, Chris?
I'm dumbfounded at the way that they came out in game 2. To lose the way that they lost in game 1 was heartbreaking, giving up a 3-goal lead. But then I figured that they were going to be coming out guns a-blazing in game 2 and just, wipe the floor with Columbus. And
instead,
and
they
the
fell
exact-
behind 2-0 within minutes of the start of the game.
right. And they just, and then Kucherov to do what he did in the third period. When the game's over and you let your frustrations boil over, and now he's suspended. He's arguably their best player. And, Columbus had a 2 games to nothing lead last year against Washington and blew that.
This seems really different, though.
Right. I don't think that it's over, but, tonight's game will, in a lot of ways, determine the Lightning season.
Well, let me ask you this. Can you guys function when you're heartbroken? The Lightning got their heart broken in game 1. They did not function well in game 2. In your everyday work, can you function when you're heartbroken?
Yeah, I work in national security, so I better function. You're an adult. You're a big boy. Put on your big boy pants and go and kick some ass. That's all I can say. And I'm disappointed. And I was sitting watching the game in Honolulu yesterday, and I was just so sad. And so were all the people watching it with me. So,
Becca, can you function when you're heartbroken? You've never been heartbroken.
I have been heartbroken. I
Have
had
you?
one really bad breakup, but I met Chip 2.5 months later. So, it was the best thing that ever happened. But no, but then again, I can't play sports. So perhaps I missed the gene to compartmentalize.
Yeah, but I think to apply it to our everyday lives kind of makes sense. If you get in a fight with Chip, can you go out that morning and speak before 300 college students?
Without hesitation.
agreed.
You can compartmentalize.
Yeah, because work is work and life is life. Now, if Chip said, hey, I'm pulling the plug on our marriage, I might have to call quits. But an argument? No, that's normal. After 22 years, if we haven't figured out how to work through discourse, then we're wasting our time.
Chris, can you write a good bill if some crazy girl has left you on the side of the highway to love?
That's really interesting that
The
you
cruise ship
infer
to
that
love.
he can write a good bill. I think that's...
You have written good bills, haven't you?
Yeah, and I have a couple that should pass this year. One that
There's a couple that shouldn't pass, but we'll talk about
one
that
that's
in a
ready
minute.
for the House floor is a DNA bill that would allow a judge to do an arrest warrant if there is a DNA match in a state or federal database.
What
CODIS.
kind of like 23andMe DNA or like
No,
CODIS?
like on a CODIS match.
I thought that was already a thing.
No, well, currently you can get a search warrant to have another DNA.
All right, yeah, that I knew. Yeah.
But this would allow a judge to do an arrest warrant if there's a DNA match.
Yeah, man. If you have committed a crime, do not submit your DNA to 23andMe or Ancestry.com.
No, but your family will, and that's how we're getting these people. That's how
That's
we
how
got
they got the Golden State Killer.
I was just gonna say that. So
it was fascinating, man.
Yeah.
It really was.
poor Michelle McNamara. So
Yeah.
sad.
That was sad, but it's kind of beautiful the way
It
her
is
husband
beautiful.
honored her legacy.
Yeah, it is beautiful. And if you read her book, it's just I'm a true crime
Yes, we know.
Yeah, we
I'm all
know.
about
Everybody
Discovery
knows. Trust
ID
me.
and
Yeah, and I remember, and what
Gotta
all
get
of
you
my
together with my wife, man.
Dude,
You guys can
hook it
have
up.
one of those telethons that
Hook
she goes through.
it up. So I'm on. So a couple of my true crime groups that I'm a part of, and I'm part of a lot of them. And when that broke, it was like every podcast, every blog, every group was like, "Ba-doop, ba-doop, 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 breaking news," and so the whole community was kind of into it, and it was a great tribute to Michelle. So
I find those shows to be sad.
Oh, I listen to it every night.
watching them.
I
They
fall
scare
asleep
me.
to true crime every night.
I started
Does that make me
watching
a
that.
wimp?
Murder's my
It
jam,
just
man.
makes you not into it. I think it's just what's that show they just did? Gosh, I think it's probably a Hulu original since I don't have cable, so it's on where the girl who was
Gypsy?
Yes.
Oh, I'm obsessed. She just got engaged this week. We could talk
Okay.
about this. This is a
No,
whole other podcast.
I couldn't even watch the Hulu rendition of
Really?
it. It was so
Well, you know-
disturbing to me and scary. I had nightmares.
They made her a lot. Apparently, they made her and her family a lot of promises about what they would, give her out of the deal, and they reneged on all of that. So, I think a lot of people are really upset at the Hulu people because it's an accurate portrayal of Gypsy, but not 100%, and she's not profiting off of it like we thought she would because it's just a tragic.
I love how she's
case.
speaking for
So
her.
does this mean?
I'm a big Gypsy supporter. I really
You're
am.
a supporter of a child that had her mother murdered.
She had Munchausen by proxy syndrome and was kept against her knowledge that she had all of these issues when she didn't. I mean, she had a feeding tube put in. She
That is
had
unfortunate.
her
Her
head
teeth
shaved,
taken out.
her teeth taken out. She had free trips to Disney World from Make-A-Wish Foundation because she was supposed to be, this really, really sick child. She was 22 and she was, didn't even know how old she was. Didn't even realize she could walk for a while. I mean, come on.
Well, no, listen, it's totally screwed up. It literally scared me so much I couldn't. Chip wanted to watch it with me. I got through one episode, had nightmares, and was like, I'm out.
Yeah, well,
It's the saddest story.
I'm a bit of a hypocrite because even though I don't watch them and I don't like them as entertainment, I did appear on one.
Did
I
you?
know, and
really?
I'm so jealous.
I
Oh my
did.
God.
It was so funny. Well, God, that was the wrong thing to say.
Would Chris's DNA bill have helped you? In
No,
this?
here's what happened. Tragically, not funny. Tragically, a man who won the Illinois lottery and moved to Tampa Bay
Oh, Shakespeare.
Oh, well,
was
poor
not,
thing.
no, that's a different guy.
Dee Dee killed him.
That's Stanley Shakespeare. No, not
I love
Stanley.
that Carla knows
I
all
remember
of this.
that guy. Anyway, this was a guy who opened a gourmet popcorn stand
Oh, I remember
at
him.
Channel Side.
I love
And
gourmet popcorn.
He
Dill
was
pickle's
great.
my
He was
favorite.
murdered by his sister-in-law and her boyfriend. And at the time, I was working at the Times, but I didn't really write about that story. We had other reporters. So a year or two later, maybe 3 years later, a producer from the ID Discovery Channel, is that one of your favorite channels?
It's not my
Carla?
favorite, but it's on my radar. I watch
They
it maybe when
called
I'm
the
sick.
paper and said, "Hey, can we speak to so and so? We're doing a story about this murder." And that person was no longer working at the paper, and so the person said, "Oh no, she no longer works here." And so the guy explained that what they were looking for someone to talk about this case, and the guy at the time said, "Well, call Ernest Hooper. He'll do anything to be on TV." So they called me and they said, "We know you didn't write about this, but are you familiar with the case?" So I was like, I'm very familiar. The body was found not far from my home. And so they ended up interviewing me, and I went to a ballroom at the Holiday Inn in Brandon and spent about an hour and a half answering questions about the case.
They didn't even fly you in somewhere.
So we need to
No,
find this episode.
They were here. And so what they do is they have about, I'd say 6 to 8 questions, and they ask them at least 3 or 4 times. And each time you get better at giving the answer. I mean, like they mix it up, and you, at first you kind of don't know what's going on, but after a while you're kind of like, "Oh, I see what you guys are doing." And then, once you get good at answering the question, that's the take that they use in the show. And so, it's a show called Blood Relatives. You can still find it on YouTube. And one of the more interesting aspects of that appearance is that I now am registered on IMDb. You can search my name and it'll say Ernest Hooper.
I'm doing that right now.
Appeared on Blood Relatives. And
That's awesome.
You know what's weird though? I've had, no exaggeration, at least a dozen calls from different producers since then wanting me to talk about the same case.
So interesting.
And I've declined them all. I mean, I kind of did it once to see what it was all about, but I'm not really interested.
Well, if
But
they
you
only
had
took
this,
you to the
like-
Holiday Inn in Brandon, I would decline it too. Every time I've done a TV appearance, they've flown me somewhere. So
I
it's
think
like,
some of them offer to compensate you. but I haven't.
You should tell them you have a great friend that is.
So
I'll let them know,
do
Carla.
y'all
I've
want to go
done-
see the Ted Bundy movie together?
Hell yeah.
The four of us.
I'm not interested.
I
In
mean,
that.
that's a Florida story.
It
It is a
definitely
Florida
is.
It's a Florida story. I lived in Tallahassee
So
when that
sad.
happened. I think I was
Yeah.
12, and it scared the bejesus out of me.
There was a murder in my neighborhood when I was a kid, and it really, like, at the end of the neighborhood when I lived in Palm Harbor, and it scared me so much. Like, it was, I mean, I slept in the family room outside of my parents' room for like ever. I mean, it really traumatized me.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it was awful. So anyways,
Is
on
there something wrong about true crime being entertainment?
You know something? So as a cultural studies professor, I get asked this a lot. I've been quoted in a bunch of different national magazines to talk about this, actually.
Carla would like you to call her to please appear on television.
If you need any
anytime.
more, I'm available. My number is 813. I'm just kidding. No, but seriously, I have been the featured expert in a couple of these different things just because I do have a cultural studies background and I teach pop culture. And you know, there is something about the commodification of murder and suffering that is just absolutely awful, and the idea that we're consuming this for entertainment. At the same time, if you look at the demographics, most of the consumers are women, and we bond over talking about true crime for a lot of reasons. One being we have similar kind of experiences of, oh, this almost happened to me. I almost got murdered today. I almost got assaulted in the parking lot coming back from Target. Ladies, be careful. So in most of my true crime community is kind of focused on prevention and being safe. And one of the things that Crime Junkie, shout out to anyone who loves Crime Junkie, we always say, be rude, be weird, stay alive. And there's been a lot of times where I'm like, you know what? Screw this. Like, be rude, be weird. See ya. You know? So,
Could I argue that watching those shows are making you more insecure
No.
than you need to be?
no, because if you look
You're the expert.
If you look at the demographics of women who talk about, hey, this almost happened to me, it spans across races, genders, demographics of, you know, where people live, sociocultural issues. And I think it's one of the things that people don't talk about. But I mean, as a woman, you have to be hyper vigilant. And like that guy we were talking about a couple episodes ago, that he was walking around naked in the Dollar General. We think that's hysterical, but that woman who was, you know, the victim of his, or the target of his, you know, love, I guess, you know, was probably, his affection was probably terrified. So
For
we don't
sure.
think about it that way. We consume it in a way that I think is, I don't want to say inappropriate, but in a way
I believe
that
there was no
is-
consumption, just as an
well, I hope not. But I don't know. I think that it can be problematic, but in the same time, I think that it highlights a larger cultural issue.
Honestly, I guess I'm a wimp, but I watch Big Bang Theory and I sleep well at night. And I don't worry about anybody breaking into the house.
Are there any crime bills we should talk about going on in Tallahassee?
Like, what do y'all think is the most, like, or the biggest true crime story in Tampa Bay history?
Oh gosh, ask Ernest. I don't know.
I would say Oba Chandler.
Maybe.
Oba Chandler was big. And as you know, Thomas French, who used to work for the then St. Petersburg Times, wrote about that case and ended up winning a Pulitzer Prize. And so certainly,
And there
that's
was
one of 'em.
some serial killers like in Tampa.
Oh, there are a bunch of them. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Especially in the 70s.
Yeah.
Yeah. Serial killers was
Like,
the thing.
why were all this like serial killers in the late 70s
I will tell you why.
and early to mid 80s?
I will tell you why. Because there's a lot of research on this, and I think it's because, first of all, there wasn't, and I'm, you know, as I'm putting my rhetorician hat now, there wasn't a language to be able to describe what we're seeing. So the idea of a serial killer didn't exist, partially, I think, because we didn't have the language to kind of talk about it. So, you know, now that you have a name, now you're starting to identify all these things. So that's part of it. Secondly, you know, you have a lot of PTSD, people coming back from World War II. So you have a lot of kids in Vietnam. So you have a lot of kids who are born and experience really horrific home lives because of what their parents have experienced post-war. And you have a lot of
Can I
abuse
interject with
and
one quick
things like that.
question?
Yeah.
Since you have a lot of knowledge, do you think that, and I don't
My favorite
know
thing, by the
nor
way.
have an opinion about this, do you think serial killers are born that way, or are raised that way, or have to be born a certain way and then raised a certain way?
I mean, probably a combination of both. I mean, if you look at someone like Ted Bundy, I mean, his childhood wasn't like the most perfect thing, but no one's childhood is perfect. But I mean, you saw warning signs from a young age.
But he experienced a lot of abuse,
No,
correct?
he did
Didn't
not.
he experience abuse from his stepfather?
It was like rejection. What set him off was a longtime girlfriend, and they broke up.
Yeah.
And then, like, a lot of his victims looked like her.
But his childhood was not anything that was, traumatic or horrible. I mean, but from a young age, he would do things like set traps for the neighborhood girls, and she would, they would get all cut up and their legs would get literally cut with shrapnel. And they'd be like, "Oh, it's just boys being boys, haha," and it really does.
So there was a lot of opportunity for early intervention.
Yeah,
if they'd known better.
But Ted Bundy's a really weird case. It's about white privilege. It's about male privilege. It's about just the time not having a language to really understand what a serial killer was and how someone comes to be. So Ted Bundy's a weird case.
And when he first got arrested, I believe in Utah, there was a lot of like prominent people in Washington that thought he was innocent.
Yeah.
And they would write to the judge and to try to, help him out because they really believed that he did.
Yeah, and if you're hot, you can get away with a lot of stuff. Seriously. And he was a
that's
very
why I
attractive
never
guy.
get
You
away
say
with
that like
plot.
you know that from firsthand experience.
Yeah. Do you know how many times I probably would have been arrested by now?
All right, stop.
No, I'm kidding, but
Okay,
actually, probably not, actually.
You're going to get yourself in trouble.
What do you guys
fine.
think? There was an article in the Times this week that talked about some of the crime issues and crime bills up in Tallahassee. What do you guys think about the removal, the editing, I don't know what the right words are, of changing mandatory minimums? There's some
I
requests.
think they need to be. You mean changing it so that they're not in place, and,
Right.
and judges can go back to actually being judges and determining sentences on their own.
I think it's great.
Yeah, I think it's a step in the right direction. I would caution though that and there's empirical data out there that indicates our judicial system in the state of Florida is biased.
Yes, very much so. That's the counter argument.
Yeah, if you are white, if you are black, and you are convicted of the same or similar crime as a white person, you're more likely to get a longer sentence in the state of Florida. The Sarasota Herald Tribune did an award-winning report on that. And so
Oh, let's post that article on some of our social media. I
we
think people
should.
would like to read
It's
that.
a couple of years old, but I think it's
I'm sure it
still
holds
really
up.
relevant.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think
Chris,
it's really
you're up in
wrong.
Tallahassee right now. People are talking about this stuff. What is from a legislative side
Well,
looking
I
at it
think-
that way? What are people saying?
think that the Republican-led legislature has done a lot of things when it comes to criminal justice reform. And a lot of that is being overshadowed by the ongoing fight or argument over Amendment 4 and restoration of rights. But which I think that, Jamie Grant is absolutely right on. I think that
Wow.
a judge's sentence is a judge's sentence. And, and restitution includes that. If I steal $100,000 from you, and the judge sentences me to 10 years in prison, and you have to pay back $100,000, is my sentence over at the 10-year mark, or is it over whenever I repay?
But the debate is about
restitution?
court costs, not about restitution.
So
And there's and as I understand, talking to the lawyers I know, there's a difference
Right.
between restitution and court costs.
And sometimes the court costs will get tied into the sentence. The proponents of Amendment 4, when they argued in the Supreme Court, took a completely different stand trying to get that on the ballot than they have now. One of the main groups behind Amendment 4 deleted parts of their website after the bill or after the amendment passed. And so, from what I've heard, some of the court costs are not all that expensive. And I think
sometimes they are, I think.
well, and it also depends on what's expensive to you might be very different to what's expensive to someone else. If you're not going to make people who owe back child support lose their vote, like it's a slippery slope.
Agreed.
And there's a lot of different issues, but it seems very targeted in the fact of who they're looking at, what they're looking at, and that it's not really about a overarching, let's get justice paid. It's about to a certain degree, voter suppression. And I know you don't believe that, but I do.
I believe
I
that
do
too.
too.
Yeah, I definitely do. And I think that,
That's 3-1. Chris loses.
And I thought I was
Yay!
talking about this the
My
other
favorite.
day with, I want to say my husband or my colleague, somebody was talking about this last week, is that I think that if you are not putting people's lives in danger, and if you're not ruining people's lives, like in sense of like Enron or something, or Lehman Brothers, something really, really huge and some sort of financial scandal, huge, like a Bernie Madoff or something like that, and you're not killing anybody, there's no reason to send someone to jail. Really, I think that there are a lot of ways to give back to society than putting someone in jail where they'll become worse criminals or just, feed a system where prisons make profit off of people's bodies going to jail. And I think there are a lot of different ways we can deal with criminal justice in society and not, have people at the head of prison companies get richer.
Yeah, I will credit your GOP brethren, particularly Jeff Brandeis. They are looking at that kind of criminal reform and reducing sentences and bringing more programs to people who have been incarcerated, so when they get out, they can return to the mainstream and have a meaningful and productive life. And I think they realize that the Florida prison system hasn't been doing that. It's been a revolving door where they're letting people go, and because they haven't received any kind of counseling or training, they're returning directly back to a life
I'm saying there
of
shouldn't be
crime.
anything to return to. They shouldn't be in jail in the first place.
When I was in the committee where this bill was being heard, I was sitting next to African American Democratic colleague of mine, older guy who was a former law enforcement officer and city manager and so forth where he's from. And so I leaned over and I said, what do you think about this bill? Because I genuinely wanted to get his, feedback because he's very much pro law enforcement, because that's his background. And he said, well, the people that are trying to get their rights restored and trying to get the right to vote aren't the thugs. It's people that are trying to better themselves. And so it's not, your gang members and, and so forth, which, that was compelling.
Mm.
So can I ask you why the state legislature is trying to block the will of the people on another issue?
Because I think
Hillsborough County passed a tax to better fund their public schools. And now the Speaker of the House, Jose Oliva, is championing a bill that would force Hillsborough County to share that money with charter schools. That's not what it was intended for. That's not why we voted to approve it. So more money would go to charter schools.
I gotta say, I'm not a super fan of the speaker.
We
thus far.
approved it. We approved it because we wanted it to go to our public schools that are suffering with infrastructure issues like not having air conditioning
Or lead in the water.
or lead in the water.
Number one, charter schools in the state of Florida are considered public schools. It's in the Florida statutes that charter schools are public schools.
That's true.
And there are numerous school districts that do not share the money equally between the traditional public schools and the charter schools. There are some school districts, for instance, Sarasota does a tremendous job of working with their charter schools and their traditional public schools, but there are a lot of school districts that if you said, well, these charter schools, they're public schools, but you don't have to give them any money, would not give them a nickel. And so, and that's kind of on them that, why are you not taking care of schools that are public schools? And so the legislature then has to go and say, all right, well, you're mandated to give them part of your money.
But Chris, the need is greater with our public schools,
Completely
particularly
agree.
those that are older
So,
and suffering without basic maintenance needs, such as air conditioning. My Plant High graduate
okay, so
here
I have a story about this. in a second.
knows all too well about this
So,
issue.
Let's talk about this for 1 second. And you can cut this out if you want to. So I was at Plant 2 weeks ago. Because I've got one of my military colleagues that is trying to decide, he's moving back from DC, trying to decide, okay, if they get special assignment to go to Plant, they should get it to Robinson, IB. Like, what should I do? Go to Academy, Jesuit? Like, what kind of education do I want for my kid? So I went to visit Plant with him because I was trying to be nice. I will say, it was a weird experience. It was, I mean, I saw girls with purses that were way nicer than mine. This girl had an MCM backpack. All right, let's talk about that. First of all, MCM's freaking ugly. Number one. Second of all, like, you're 12. Like,
What
really?
is MCM?
It's a brand. It's an expensive brand. But they're walking around in outfits that are like amazing, and the building is literally falling around them. Number one. And I was a little bit disappointed with the quality of the building, because when I was there, it was a lot nicer. And number two, as somebody who, and I'm going to put my like operational security kind of hat on, as somebody who works for the federal government and consults for cybersecurity companies and does like pen testing and stuff, not a lot, but I'm familiar with that world. They built this really ugly fence around the school. It's really, I mean, have you seen it?
It's white, isn't it?
It's not white. It's like this black wrought iron
It was
thing.
very. It was highly-
okay.
it was
Okay,
very
I know the
dramatic
fence.
situation.
It was a very dramatic situation. It was very ugly. So I'm meeting with the principal, and the principal was he was very nice. But he's like, yeah, safety is really important to us. There's only one point of entry in, one point of entry out. I'm like, first of all, that's bullshit. And I'll tell you why. Because I went there, I walked up, I parked illegally in a faculty lot. No one said anything to me. I piggybacked behind a student who used her ID card, who was coming in from like late or whatever, piggybacked behind her, went to the wrong office, sat there for 20 minutes. Nobody asked me, hi, who are you? Do you have a child here? Nothing. Sat there for 20 minutes, made eye contact with a bunch of people. Nobody said a damn thing to me. I was texting my friend who was in another office, and we're trying to figure out how to meet up. And, you know, you're telling me there's only one point of entry in? Like, that's bullshit. I know this because I just had I just saw 3 points of entry. Parking lot, piggyback in,
But
and
you
main
don't
office.
look like you would hurt anybody, so of course they let you sit there.
That's my point. Do you think people who want to hurt kids look like criminals? No.
Yes.
No, they don't.
Because I don't watch the true crime shows, so I don't know what they look like.
But you
So
know,
instead of spending money, my point is, instead of spending money on, you know, building a fence, why don't you spend money on better security and do an operational assessment
well,
on?
and also let me add that there are
if it's working or not.
expectations on public schools, truly public schools.
What is a truly public school?
Let me finish my statement, and
Like
then
not
we
a
will
charter
fight
school?
about that. Something that's not run by a management company, something that is a state-owned, county-run facility. They have to meet certain hurricane level standards that charter schools don't. That's incredibly expensive as far as windows, building infrastructure.
And up until recently,
there
they were
are-
able to get construction dollars, and it wasn't until the last couple of years that charter schools were able to do that.
Okay, but charter schools are coming in. They are companies. This is their
They're
business.
not companies.
They're not.
Yes, they
I will go
are.
online right now to Florida
Yes, they
Biz, and I
are.
promise you, they are registered as
They're
companies.
they're not.
they're
They
not
have
gonna
to be
be-
nonprofit.
Yeah, but their facilities, Chris, generally speaking, are newer and nicer than some of the public schools we're talking about. Plant High is what, 80 years
But
old?
90
90 years
no,
old?
over 100, I think.
Over 100.
But here's the deal: Plant High is spending $1 gazillion on some wrought iron fence that clearly
That was
doesn't
actually
work.
donated, I believe, because I remember one of the guys my mom went to high school with. I think is an architect, and I believe he either raised the money
I want
or
to come to
donated.
his house and be like, "Listen, buddy,
For the last couple of years in Hillsborough County, they have had issues with their air conditions. And it always comes up in September of, oh, well, our air conditioners don't work. So, whose job is it to look at them and inspect them over the summer when kids and teachers are not there?
Taxpayers have passed a tax to get that problem alleviated. They didn't pass that tax for money to go to brand new charter schools. They didn't. I know they didn't. I live here. I talk to these people. They want the AC fixed in the schools, and that proposal could undermine that effort. There's no doubt about it. The money needs to go where the need is. For the most part, the need is not with the charter schools.
Man,
They're
3-1
brand new.
again. Here's something. I'm going to say something nice about our Republican governor. I read this week that he wants to make sure that more people have access to voting, since we were talking about voter suppression and rights earlier. He wants to put, or what, as Chris is raging out, what we perceive as voter suppression, which Chris
You
does
have
not.
a month to vote in the state of Florida. You can vote by mail mail,
I
you can
just-
vote for a couple
what
weeks
I want to say
during
nice
early
about
voting.
about our governor is that he wants to put ballots in Spanish, which I think is, especially when we're talking about amendments that affect schools, especially all those things. I think that's a wonderful thing. I think it's a good investment to make sure people can vote the way they want to vote, and I applaud him. See, I can say nice things about the majority party too.
I'd get behind that too.
Yeah, same.
That's a
It's also an effort to win over more of the Hispanic vote.
I don't care what
No,
the reason
no.
is. I think it's a right and just thing.
Yeah, it is.
If it
is.
benefits him, then it benefits him. But doing the right and just
All
thing.
right. So why, when a Republican tries to reach out to minority groups, they're trying to get their votes. When Democrats do the same thing, it's because they have a heart of gold. And
Nobody thinks that.
I don't think anyone thinks that.
I think that there are more social. The Democratic Party is focused more on social programs that lift everyone up. I think the Republican Party traditionally, before the party had changed so much, was more about creating systems so people can independently lift themselves
with that,
up.
too.
I don't think that's. I think that's back when you had an entryway to your belief system about the role government should play. I don't think that's it anymore. Do I think that Democrats support and sponsor more programs that help our more marginalized groups? I do. But I don't think that when they ask for the vote, it's not purely altruism. They
I
want
think-
that to win.
Yeah, I'm with you.
yeah, I
as-
think
you know.
government has a moral obligation to take care of the least among us, whether it's kids, the elderly, the handicapped, pregnant women, so forth. People that
Notice he didn't
are
mention minorities. I just would like to point that out.
the minorities aren't the least among us. How would they be the least among us?
I think technically they're the most among us, right? Like,
I mean, with exception to people that can't take care of themselves, if you're I'm a single guy, not married, no kids, 37 years old.
But he's
It's
single
not
and
the-
looking to mingle, ladies.
It's not.
So please.
It's
Hands
not
off,
the
ladies.
government's
He's all ours.
responsibility to take care of me. I should go take care of myself. Whereas your, 11, 12-year-old son, if he's hungry, he can't go get a job. So that's why, we have free breakfast at school. We have free lunch. And oftentimes, a lot of schools give away food on Friday afternoons because that's the only food that kid's going to eat.
Yeah, we definitely need to do a better job of taking care of kids, which leads us to the next topic. This week in Port St. Lucie, we had a school resource officer pick up an 11-year-old and body slam him in the same manner that a WWE wrestler would body slam a 6'5", 275-pound man. But this was not a 6'5" person. This was an 11-year-old kid. And now the officials in Port St. Lucie are trying to justify this treatment because the child was in a violence prevention program. Right or wrong, Chris?
And was known to have had weapons before. And who was ignoring orders, and he was required to have staff with him at all times on school, ignored their orders. They called the school resource officer who tried to apprehend him, and he was uncooperative with the school resource officer.
So you're saying the 11-year-old deserved to be body slammed like he was Hulk Hogan?
I was not there. I read.
You've seen the video.
No, and the video is not, is definitely not easy to watch. But it did mention that he required a Band-Aid, and so he wasn't seriously injured or seriously
Only by
hurt.
the grace of God, in my opinion. He picked up the child above his head and slammed him on the concrete.
That's
It's a miracle
showboating.
that he only
That's
needed a
showboating.
Band-Aid.
That's
really
not
is.
law
I agree.
enforcement.
I think that's true too.
Do I think the
he's-
child is victim?
And the officer hadn't had
violent.
one excessive force complaint against him.
Well, that's because people didn't video everything police officers were doing.
Or maybe he just
anymore.
lost his, he was just mad this one time and was not that it's excusable, but I'm saying maybe he just snapped this one time with
but
his
I
kid.
think what
School
Carla
shooter
said
in
earlier-
Parkland was in a violence prevention program.
Well, okay, two things I hear here. Number one, it looks like what y'all should be looking at in Tallahassee is effective violence prevention programs because clearly they're not working, number
Yeah,
one.
he shouldn't be in school. If he's that violent, he should not be in school.
Or
period.
there should be a better case plan in place. And two, Carla pointed out earlier, which I think is important to say publicly, that the child was running away.
Oh yeah,
Towards.
yeah, yeah. Before I saw the video, I thought he might have been in an altercation with the school resource officer, but he's walking away, like kind of trotting, not really walking, not really running. I think it was kind of like a little like hop. And I think, someone grabs you from the back and like body slams you. I feel like that's a little excessive.
So if he would have followed the officer's orders when the officer said stop, do you think the officer would have walked up to him and body slammed him?
Maybe actually, with that
No, I mean,
excessive force,
follow-
maybe I don't know, but
The
maybe.
moral of the story is follow the orders of the law enforcement officers.
I don't know. I just think an 11-year-old is capable
think
of being insolent and disobedient, and I don't know if the remedy to that disobedience is a body slam. I think the officer.
think
I
that's
think the
ever
officer
appropriate.
could have grabbed
It
him.
matters when he's
I think the
11.
officer could have wrestled him to the ground.
Which are all normal
you know,
tactics to.
And are we holding the officer to a high standard? Yes. Because he is a school resource officer, we're expecting him, as we like to say, to be the adult in the room and maintain some degree of composure and not get caught up in the madness that this child has brought to the school.
There were two middle school students this week that were arrested in Maryland for credibly, it was an incident that their classmates reported that was very credible of them shooting up the school. And two kids were arrested. They're not much older than 11 years old to be in middle school.
You know, if those two kids had been body slammed at an earlier age, they would not have come up with that plan. Come on, man. Physical. There's no evidence that physical punishment results in better behavior. In fact, the evidence indicates the exact opposite, which is why they have stopped paddling kids in school.
And also supports Carla's argument at the greater swath of improving society is not to just throw everyone into cages and put them in prison and work more on rehabilitation and creating a better culture for all.
I agree. I mean, if you're not taking away my retirement because you're, Bernie Madoff, and you're not killing a family member or endangering someone's lives, then I think you should stay out of prison.
Is it difficult dealing with disciplinary problems? Yes. Do we have an issue with poor parenting or absent parenting in homes that lead to these kids misbehaving? Yes. Would I have ever been body slammed when I was 11? No, because the first time I got in trouble when I was 6, my mother came to the school and said to me, if I have to come to this school again, you may not live to regret it.
So violence doesn't work, but threats of violence.
And then Deneen would have went to the school and whooped somebody's tail.
Not
They would have messed with little Ernest.
not threats of violence, but parenting.
Right, I know. I'm just being facetious.
And that's a missing element. And so I know educators deal with a lot of frustrating situations, but the answer is not brute force.
And in the article I read, which is another spin to the story, is this kid's mom recently passed, and his dad's not around, and I think was being raised by his aunt. So there's probably a lot of stuff going on in that
trauma.
kid's
I think it's really interesting. We don't pre-plan what we're going to talk about, but all these things are kind of stacked and related. Education, violence prevention,
Murder,
criminal justice, like they're all. It's a slippery slope.
Crime.
So I think it's interesting how all these things have kind of crime have kind of come together, and and we all
the
around
lightning
this table,
imploding.
right?
Crime.
We all around
It is
this
a
table.
crime.
It really is.
Magic Johnson's sudden resignation.
I'm sorry. Let Becca finish her thought.
For the love of Pete and all his followers. But I think it's interesting that we all, have respectfully come around the table with these different issues, and we can obviously agree to disagree, but I think it's important conversations. And I think this is one of the things that is unfair that I think sometimes public officials have to deal with. And trust me, I'm not saying that public officials have a walk in the park, but people look at a singular issue and say, that was wrong, you shouldn't have voted that way. But a lot of times it's part of a much larger spiral of issues that are interrelated. And so I understand that sometimes the vote that you make is much more complex and complicated and and all those different things. And so I think it's interesting. And again, I'm not saying that I agree with all Chris's votes, but I do know that he takes them
Like
seriously.
90 some odd percent of them you probably agree with.
I agree with it. You're right on a lot of issues. You're just really wrong
More
on a
right
couple
than
of
wrong.
them. You're a wonderful person. We're just gonna.
He's a nice man.
He's a very nice man. But
I'm excited about our Tallahassee. Y'all coming up
Oh,
to
yeah.
Tallahassee.
We have to talk about
you're
that. I'm
like
so
you're like
excited.
the host with the most. Chris has been getting all his Tallahassee people excited for this visit.
Yeah.
All right, can I just say something? As you know, part of my duties at the paper involve sports, and while we are disappointed with the Lightning's performance, if they get swept by the Columbus Blue Jackets, it will greatly enhance my chances of going to Tallahassee. So let's root for Columbus.
That doesn't make it any better. I mean, I love you. I think you're great. I don't want them to lose tonight.
Well,
I'm really sad.
Actually, it's funny.
Okay.
My
Ernest,
colleague Rick Stroud, who has covered the Bucks for nearly 30 years,
Yeah, Rick's great.
always says when you are covering a team, you either want them to be really, really good or really, really bad. The Lightning have
sense.
managed to be both all in a single season.
Would you rather the tax that was passed in Hillsborough go strictly to traditional public schools? I don't know if that's an acceptable term. I don't want to be
Well, that is
exclusionary.
the legal term used in
Okay.
the Florida statutes.
Okay. Would you rather the money go to traditional public schools and the Lightning lose, or the Lightning win and the money be distributed equally?
I'm all about equality, so
Oh gosh.
The money needs to go where the need is. It shouldn't be equally distributed. It shouldn't be, it shouldn't be equally distributed. If there's a charter school that perhaps has taken over a school that Hillsborough County has abandoned and that school is aging, yes, they should receive some money. But that decision should be made locally. It's a local tax.
I'm going to pour some out for Ernest. That's true.
Legislature, can you stay out of this? Can we yes, home rule.
one of the
Step
first
aside.
Just open
one
it
of the
in
first
charter
schools of
schools.
hope in the state of Florida is going to be opened in Hillsborough County, so we
What's
should
that?
all go visit it. And also,
I'm
one
glad
day,
they're calling it a school
Yeah, can you
of hope because I hope it
explain-
fails.
Could you explain what that is for everyone that doesn't know,
a
including me?
couple years ago, your
Sharon?
co-host
Boondoggle?
on the podcast helped write a bill that would allow high impact charter schools that met 5 or 6 different criteria, 2 of which were 80% of the kids had to go to college and at least 70% of the kids had to be on free reduced lunch. So these were schools that thrived in places like Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Harlem, Phoenix, San Antonio, and a couple other places that had
Houston.
had sections of poverty in which our then president, President Obama, praised these schools during his charter school week that he held. Would allow these schools to come into Florida in the same school zone as a persistently failing public school that had been failing for at least 4 years in a row.
So let me ask you a
So they
question.
couldn't go to like the good area of town. They had to go into the school zone that had a persistently failing school to take, like, not take over, but to be competing with the traditional public school, and they would be taking those same kids.
So let me use an analogy here for my question. So in my line of work, when you have duplication of efforts, it means someone's not doing their job. So if you have a command with like 3 PR shops and a strategic communication person, it means somewhere down the line in history, somebody was dead weight and a new commander comes in and it's like, can't really fire anybody over here, so I'm just going to make a new shop over here. I feel like that's what's going on with charter schools and public schools. And correct me if I'm wrong. It's that public schools and the system isn't doing their job, so these things have to pop up over here. And people are praising that, but shouldn't we look at why they're popping up? Like,
Exactly.
I mean, shouldn't
Exactly.
I mean,
And to have a new school pop up merely makes it more difficult for the traditional school to succeed.
But
doesn't
how
it say
long-
that
that
the
traditional schools
school-
already struggling.
But doesn't it
How
signal
long
that
should
school
a
isn't
traditional public school fail for until people say, hey, why don't we try something new? Some of these schools have been failing for 10 years in a row, which in Jefferson County, which had 2 public schools, both of their public schools failed for more than 10 years in a row. So now Jefferson County is run by a charter
So
school.
doesn't it seem like the people who are not being held accountable for making the schools fail or for allowing schools to fail, you're just like moving the problem somewhere else? Like, shouldn't the actual failing school be given attention and people be held accountable for their actions?
Jefferson County was getting more than $14,000 per
I'm
student.
not talking about money. I'm talking about like, okay, who's in charge and why don't we fire them and get someone else to run a school so it doesn't fail?
Yeah,
But that decision should be made at the local level.
Yeah,
But what if
what
the
you're
It
talking-
should be made at the local
and-
level
and-
initially.
And this is to say nothing about Hillsborough County, but what was going on in Jefferson County, those local elected officials were borderline corrupt. And when you have when the local people could care less whether or not the schools are performing, all they care about is getting reelected and hiring their friends and all that kind of stuff. So if a school's failed for 5, 6, 7 years in a row, at what point should we say, hey, why don't we try something new? Because unlike a charter school that could get shut down tomorrow by a school board for any reason whatsoever, a traditional public school will never be shut down.
So, yeah, I have one more question about public schools and charter schools. How long are they going to be around? Like, if they're run like businesses, how long do you expect them to actually be sustainable as a quote unquote business model or as a education model? And
Well, one of the charter school people that I met that would be eligible for the Schools of Hope grants that we passed operated in Harlem, New York, and 99% of their students went on to college.
Oh, that's great. I'm just asking, okay, so if my kid graduates in 1999, what are the odds that my grandkids will be able to go to that school too? Because I think public schools are really integral to the success of a community in the sense of, producing alumni that come back and being a part of the culture of the local community. I think that's really important. And I think that's one of the reasons why, as of now, I'm against charter schools, because I feel like they don't have a kind of strong root in the community. Like, I'm really proud of going to Plant. I'm really proud of going to Academy. My whole family went to Jesuit. Like, those are schools that are public and private that are really rooted in our community. And I think that's great. And I would like charter schools to be able to serve that purpose, but I don't know how long they're going to be around.
Right. Well, I think they may end up being around for a long time, because the legislature's goal is to get rid of public schools and have it all run by
Called
charter
privatization
schools.
of education.
Yes, they want to privatize education. And I think in that process, there are going to be some kids who are left behind. And that's why I fear that. I'm not opposed to charter schools. There are some charter schools who are doing an outstanding job. And I'll start with Pepin Academies, which is working with students with learning disabilities. And the work they do is nothing short of remarkable. And they're helping kids come out of the fog. But I just wish the legislature would make more of an effort to help our traditional public schools instead of undermining.
And that is why in the Florida House budget, our FEFP was increased by $167 per student.
It's about time.
I guess maybe it doesn't matter. I mean, it matters money. Money per student matters. Not saying that, but I'm saying you can misspend a lot of money. I know, I see it. I see it every day. I work in the federal government. I see money being wasted all the time.
No, when I say they need, the traditional schools need more help, it's not just about money. It's about test requirements. It's about
measure of effectiveness, standards, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Maintenance, having air conditions that work.
So
they're like, you can have more pride in your school if your school looks better. If you have the money to not just fix the air conditioning, but to get a new paint job, to get a mural painted of historical figures that can inspire a student. I mean, there's a lot of different things we're talking about. It's not just per pupil spending. It's not just about money. And there does need to be accountability for the school district. I'm not saying there needs to be. I think there probably is some waste. I think there is some money being invested in some programs that aren't working. I think there are some, as much as they argue that the school district isn't top heavy, not just Hillsborough, but around the state, I think there are some school districts that are top heavy and have too many administrators.
So I'm glad y'all are finally
them.
seeing my way of thinking on this whole education stuff.
Well, if we thought
Y'all
you
are
were,
seeing the light.
if we thought you were completely out to lunch, you wouldn't be sitting here.
But the way we treat public schools is not. We give more credence in the state to charter schools, and it's the same slippery slope and that we have with privatized prisons. I know that the majority party wants to believe that private industry can do everything better, but the fact remains, and let's look at child welfare, for example, that's simply not the case.
And child welfare in Florida has been screwed up under both Republicans and Democrats.
Yeah, but
Agreed.
the point is privatization really hasn't worked in any arena. Yet we are led to believe it'll work in public education. One of the most complex, difficult tasks we have in our society today. But it's time to kind of wrap.
And I was just about to tell y'all that I'm against private prisons, but maybe we can talk about that another
You
time.
know what? We ought to get Jeff Brandis on the show. He's very thoughtful about that. But anyway, we're coming to Tallahassee.
He doesn't care about the Workforce Protection Act, so I don't want to give him screen time.
All right.
Or airtime. My bad.
Fair enough.
We got to be open to all views, Becca.
Okay.
When are we going to Tallahassee?
Next week.
Not next
No,
week.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yeah,
Like
get it right. Jeez.
Yeah, it's 2 weeks. So we'll
And
we'll
hopefully the lightning will be eliminated by then.
But we have some really exciting guests lined up, and Chris has really taken the lead on that. And I think that let's give him a little round of applause, everybody. We've beat him up pretty good today.
Hey, Chris.
All my Republican colleagues will come in one by one to
You have lined up a majority of Democrats because you
my
wanted to
goodness.
get a lot of fresh voices, and you're very fair about those things. I have to give
I
you
am-
credit
I
where
am
credit
very-
is
I
due.
do want to hear from some of your Republican colleagues, though. And I know you got an issue with Senator Brandis, but I really would like to hear.
And there's a guy, one of our freshman Republicans is big into early learning, and I thought about bringing him on here.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's
because you
cool.
know that's an issue that's near and dear to me. Hey,
I just think Senator Brandis just represents St. Pete, not his whole district. That's my issue. I'm sure he's a
But
lovely person.
he's very good when it comes to criminal justice
He is.
reform.
And I will say, but when I've seen him in person before, he reminds me overwhelmingly, if you haven't met him, of like every 80s villain, like 16 Candles or like Sweep the Leg. He is the Sweep the Leg guy. He has this very strong
Lawrence?
bad boy
He
appearance.
does not
like,
look anything like Johnny
no,
Lawrence.
he has that essence of he would have been cast as one of those characters. So his instead of sweep the leg, his motto should be swept the district or something like that, because that is his doppelganger person, like the aura that he lets off.
do you have a problem with that? No, Sensei.
I hope somebody calls him Sensei up in Tallahassee. That'd be awesome. All right, maybe
That's
we can
so
get the Sensei
funny.
on the
Can
program.
I ask you guys a quick question just to wrap up? April 13th was Vinyl Record Day. People were encouraged to go to their vinyl record stores and keep vinyl records alive. Vinyl records are actually making a comeback. It's really interesting. I wanted to ask each of you, what was the first record that you purchased on your own? Not something that you ask your parents to buy. What was the first record when you went to the store and bought a record or CD, since, Becca's too young to remember vinyl?
I don't know if I ever even had a record.
I had a bunch of records.
I had tapes. I know I had a Thriller. I had the Thriller tape, and I had Crisscross, because they'll make you want to jump.
I want to say I had the crisscross
Jump.
And I
wanna
can't
say I
remember
had that.
which one. I remember getting Crisscross on either like in 3rd or 4th grade.
Jump.
And Thriller was probably way before that.
Daddy Mac will make you
Jump.
Crisscross will make you.
jump. Come on.
What did you buy,
We're
Carly?
hilarious.
Do you remember?
I don't think like an actual record. I don't remember.
tape, 8-track, whatever, CD.
Probably Janet Jackson, Rhythm Nation was the tape I remember getting, but I'm not sure if that was the first one. I mean, I know I used to listen to Islands in the Stream on vinyl, but I think it was my mom's. But that's to this day my favorite song. But I remember listening
Dolly
to that.
Parton and Kenny Rogers?
Yeah.
Wow.
They're amazing.
Wow.
Like the
She
greatest
is
song
correct.
ever.
She is correct.
I would not have pegged you as a Dolly Parton, Kenny Rogers fan.
My Dolly
She's a
station on Pandora
feminist.
is
Of
amazing.
course she loves Dolly Parton.
Freaking love Dolly Parton, man.
Come on now.
Amazing.
My tape that I first remember buying was Eternal Flame by the Bangles.
I think you know something. No, mine was Walk Like an Egyptian. I had this thing called a little these little mini tapes, and I bought it. I remember that. I think the other side was Eternal Flame. So
I loved it so much. And I remember when you used to have to wait for the radio to play it if you didn't have it.
and you
would
had
be
to like press it really fast.
record. But that
Yeah.
song, Close Your Eyes,
Give me your hand,
darling.
Do you feel my heart beating? Do you understand? Do you feel?
Crisscross will make you
I
want
met
to.
her.
Jump.
You know, I met Susanna Hoffs. I saw her do that live at Hard Rock when she
That's
was here. And I went
beautiful.
backstage with Lisa Casalino, and we met her. We hung out with her for
One of the Crisscross guys died.
2 hours.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Sadly, yeah.
So let's dedicate this episode to him.
We should.
So I got on my yellow bicycle that kids used to tease me about because it was yellow. And I rode to the record bar on Tennessee Street in Tallahassee, Florida, and purchased Too Hot to Handle by Heatwave, which had Boogie Nights and the all-time favorite love song of mine, Always and Forever. And I remember
Can you drop a little melody?
I
for
remember
us?
I remember riding home really fast because I was worried that the record was going to melt, which is so funny because the cover of that album is a record melting. But no, I'll never forget that day. I was so excited, and to this day, I love the music of Heatwave. And I'm actually, you should know, I once did a recording for NPR, in which my old college roommate tricked me into singing Boogie Nights, and it's on tape with NPR. It might be in the
This is
congressional
like-
record or something.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of Ernest Archives today. So
What do y'all think Deneen listened to? Some Whitney Houston?
maybe,
Yeah, probably.
maybe.
No, probably Always and Forever.
I bet she sat there watching the bodyguard going, what could have been?
Yep. Good old,
She's so
Oh.
over me.
good
All
old
right,
Tony Scott.
Where is Tony Scott?
Where is Tony
When are
Scott?
we making a road trip to Lake County to get this mystery solved? You say you like mysteries.
Oh, you
No, I like murder. Those are very
You
different.
need to get your true crime people up on that. We got a name, Deneen. I can give you the description off air.
Nobody was murdered, so I'm not sure
Mid-80s.
We don't
they'd
know
be-
that. We don't know
No,
what has happened.
I think we know no one was murdered.
I'm pretty sure Deneen wasn't murdered.
Yeah.
What if she,
Or did any murdering.
we don't know. I'm just
we
saying
need to
it's
change the
unclear.
subject. Enough.
All right. So everybody,
First Loves?
please
Ernest, your
subscribe
turn.
to the podcast. And while you're doing so, listen to your first purchased album, record, CD, or download, and know that we're thinking about you.
And I'd like a Clearwater Threshers hat next time I see you. Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
He's a season ticket holder supporting business in his district.
I love that field, by the way.
I
That's
do too.
one of the
Yeah,
nicest.
it's nice.
It's so
And I
nice.
love the Yankees Stadium too.
Yeah, we're really fortunate.
We are. Yeah.
All right.
All right. That'll do.